We've been looking at different things that you might see when you look up at the night sky. Last we were talking about shooting stars or meteors. But there's also something else. You might be looking at the night sky and you might see satellites. So those, when you actually look at them, a satellite will actually look like just a solid dot that moves across the sky fairly quickly, slower than a meteor, or a shooting star, but it will still be fairly constant. Now, how do you tell the difference between that and an airplane? Well, airplane lights tend to flash. Satellites, those just are like nice solid line, thing going across the sky. Now, what is a satellite? Well, a satellite is just something that orbits a larger body. So in this case right here, a satellite can be, we often use the word satellite to mean man-made objects. So here, for example, this is GPS. If you've ever used your car or a smartphone GPS, you've used this. And GPS stands for Global Positioning System. So there's a bunch of satellites that go around, and it turns out by knowing where the satellites are and when they are, in a sense, then you can sort of figure out, or your little device figures out your location. Now, satellites can be used for communication, for all sorts of things, but in fact, a satellite is a more generic term for anything that orbits anything else. So for example, we have the moon. The moon orbits the Earth, so it's technically a satellite of the Earth. Now, one last thing I wanted to talk about is when you're looking up at the sky, you might look up and wonder, what are those things? So what is it that I'm looking at? So for example, let's just say you're looking up at the sky and it looks like this. You might say, well, what are these stars, or are they other things? Well, it turns out you can figure this out. You don't have to memorize these things. Technology is so awesome for this. I don't know if you have either a smartphone. So for example, I have an Android phone, but maybe you use iOS. So that's Apple. Let's say you have an iPhone, or maybe you have a Windows phone. There exist some apps. So Google Sky Map for Android is free. And that one, I wish they paid me for these things. I do pretty good advertising for them because I think these applications are magic. So this Google Sky Map, what it does, you just hold up your phone up to the sky, and you'll see that whatever you're pointing to, it'll tell you what star it is or what planet it is. This one is free, the Google Sky Map. Now the star chart one, that one's by a company called Escapist Games. That one for the iPhone and Android and Windows Phone, that one you have to pay a little bit of money, but it's the best money I ever spent. I think it's like, at least in Denmark, it's a few kroners, so it's not that expensive. But this one here is so awesome as well. So this is just something you might want to check out at some point. Now, when you're looking up at the sky, you might also see planets. Now, planets are going to be hard to tell from these other things that you're looking at. So just go back over here. Over here, it's hard to tell if any of these were planets. If you looked at the sky over time, you would see that all these other stars stay still, and maybe a bright one seems to sort of wander across the sky over a large number of days. And that's actually what a planet is. A planet is one of these things that sort of looks like it wanders around. So we're going to do a quick overview of the different planets. Remember, a planet is just a rocky or gassy body that goes around the sun. So in this case, or around any star. In this case, we're going to look at our own solar system. So when we talk about our own solar system, what we mean is these are the things that orbit our own sun. So all of this represents our solar system, because solar means sun-like, so solar system. So this is not to scale exactly, and this picture, for example, was taken in a different wavelength or different filter here, but this just gives you an idea. So the central thing is the sun. That's the star that's got all the fusion going on in it, giving off all the light. Then we have the first planet, which is Mercury. Then we have Venus. Then we have Earth. Hey, that's where we live. Then we have Mars. Then we have this region over here called the asteroid belt. So there's lots of these rocks that are just sort of floating around between Mars and Jupiter. Some people think that this is maybe a failed planet, maybe a planet that didn't quite make it together. And then we have Saturn, then Uranus, then Neptune, and we have these comets that come in that sort of orbit around the sun and go back. Like I said, this is not to scale. I'm going to show you something. Rather than just show you a bunch of pictures, there's a really cool web page you can go to. The American Space Agency called NASA made this. So what I'm going to do is show you that one. So eyes.nasa.gov. Once you go there, depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, it'll ask you to install or at least accept and things like that. So go ahead and do it. But once you load it up, it looks like this. Okay, so this here is what it looks like. So when you first come in, it looks a little bit sort of messy, I guess you could say. And we have the sun, and I'm just if you click and then drag, you'll see that you can sort of move everything around. So it's like you're sort of moving the camera. Now, if you notice, it looks a little bit messy right now, and that's because right here you can click right here on visual controls, and you can control what you turn on and off. I'd recommend you turn off the spacecraft, and that way then you can see a little bit clearer what there is. But by the way, just to show you, it is kind of cool though. If you do want to see the spacecraft, these are the different things that are currently going around in space. And if you scroll back and forth, you can actually zoom in and out. You can see that there are some of these spacecraft that are actually really far out. So Voyager and Pioneer and things like that. But for right now, let's turn off the spacecraft. So there we go, they're off. And I'll just hide this, so I click there. What I'm going to do then over here, I'm going to click on Destination. And that brings up this, and I'm going to go to planets and moons, and I'm going to choose, let's say, the first one. So I'm going to choose Mercury and say go. What this is going to do is zoom in to Mercury. That's the closest one to the sun. So now what I can do around Mercury, I can take a look at it and see if, there's some interesting things around it. I highly recommend you actually try doing this. I think it's really cool to look at this different app or this program here and see what you can actually see with these things. So very first thing is that the first couple of planets, if we go back to our slide over here, the first Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, those are considered terrestrial planets, and that's because they're rocky. Whereas Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Mars, those are gaseous ones. So let's take a look then at this first one. So that was Mercury, and you can see it's got lots and lots of impact craters. It's got lots of holes from things that have blasted into it and made like a big dent. Now, it's thought that all the bodies in our solar system have this. It's just that sometimes you have something that can sort of renew it. So you can sort of erase them. But in this case, Mercury is very close to the sun. It's a rocky, dry, desolate place. And it's very hot. And there's lots of craters. So that's Mercury. So maybe if we just zoom way out, then we can maybe go to the next one. So that's Venus. You could, of course, get to it by clicking like that, or you can always go here and then choose Venus and then do go. So if we do Venus, this is another planet. This is the second planet from the sun. And Venus itself is also a rocky planet, but it has an atmosphere, so it has some gases that cover it. Now, that one is extremely hot, and that's an example of actually the greenhouse effects that have gone crazy. And there's lots of gases and things, and that make it not necessarily a very nice place to go visit. Then, of course, we have the Earth. Well, that one we know. We've been there. We live there, in fact. So, I mean, if we zoomed in on the Earth, that's not so exciting for the moment because we know what the Earth is like. I mean, we live there. This is your home. So, of course, we can zoom out a little bit. We should be able to see the moon somewhere. There's the moon. And then, of course, you can zoom in on that if you felt like it. But, I mean, this is our neighborhood. We know this area here. So what I'd like to show you instead is the next one out. So instead of Earth, let's do Mars. Let's go there. So that's the third planet out. There we go. Sorry, fourth planet out, actually. So this one here is Mars, and it does have some moons as well. It's got one called Deimos, another one called Phobos. And actually, Mars is a really interesting place for us. It's rocky, it has an atmosphere, but it also has water ice at its poles. So if you zoom in, whoa, that was too much. There we go. It actually has actual ice. I mean, you could chip off this stuff and put it in a glass if you could, and then actually drink it if you melted that stuff. So, I mean, it does have water ice at its north and south pole. And there are lots of robots that are floated that have been to visit Mars. It's a very interesting place for it. For what our purposes are. For right now, I'm just giving you a tour of the solar system, but there is a lot more to say about this. And in fact, in subsequent videos, we're going to go into more detail about which of these are more interesting for life. But as far as right now, we're just doing a quick intro and a quick sort of visit to the different places. So after Mars, if we zoomed out, we can see that next is Jupiter. So I could get to it by double-clicking on Jupiter or just going right here. So Jupiter now is not rocky. It's a gaseous planet. That means it's got lots and lots of gases. And in fact, it's got all these big weird storms going on. In fact, there's this big red dot. If you look at this one right here, this big red storm here. And what's really cool about it, it's got lots of moons. So this one right here, if I zoom out, I should be able to see a bunch of its moons at least. So it's got a whole bunch of moons. It's got even more than this because you can always turn them on. If you do visual controls, you can actually choose to see sort of all of its moons. And I think if you do it right, it gives you a whole bunch more. So then you can see there's a whole bunch of different moons that go around, and you can of course click on them and see what they look like. But that's Jupiter. Jupiter is actually the most massive of all the planets. And actually, with this right here, with even just like a telescope like I have at home, not a really super fancy one, you can still see these lines across Jupiter. That's what's really cool. It doesn't look quite this nice, but it looks pretty darn good. Now I want to show something. Look at this. You notice that if we line up Jupiter, and you can see we have the orbit of Saturn and Earth, and we have the Sun, you notice everything seems to line up in the same plane. It's like they're all on a plate. That's really interesting, and actually just about everything is really lined up that way. That's kind of an interesting fact from our solar system. That tells us that very likely everything formed together, because they're all sort of spinning in the same ways. So that's pretty interesting. But now if we zoom out from Jupiter, we can of course see the next one, which is Saturn. So I can double click on it. Now Saturn is another gassy planet. It's got lots of gases in it. And it's interesting, of course, because of its rings. It's got thousands and thousands of these little rings. And what's really neat, of course, it's got lots of moons as well. And we can see some of these ones here. So these are here some of its moons here. So you can sort of zoom in and out, and so you can sort of play around with this one. It's got lots and lots of moons. A really famous one it has is called Titan. That's actually an interesting one. We've actually sent a robot there. They don't have much of a view of it right now. It looks a little bit boring. But if we go out from Saturn, then the next one out we have is Uranus. And of course that one, we can click on it as well. And we can go take a look. That's another gassy planet, so it's mainly gases. And this one has really crazy storms going on, and it's got lots of moons as well. You can see it's got a whole bunch of moons. And actually new ones are being discovered all the time. That one has some really, really high winds on it. And what's interesting about it is its axis is tipped. In other words, when all the other planets, they all seem to rotate the same way. This one is like it got knocked on its side and everything rotates 90 degrees to all the other ones. So that's kind of a little bit weird. So we think maybe it got hit or something. Now this one, for Uranus and Neptune, that's the next one out. There's not much detail known about these. That's because they're so far out that not many robots have been near them. There was Voyager that came nearby, and there's another one on its way soon. But this one we don't know that much about. We don't know that much detail, at least. Same with Neptune, which is the last of the planets. So if we go out to Neptune, it's another gassy planet. It's another one with really high winds. In fact, we see these sort of storms going across it. And that one is actually pretty interesting, I think. But again, we don't know much about it, so we still have a lot more to learn about these things. Like I said, we can always zoom out, and we can then see the rest of the solar system here. So that was just a tour of our solar system. I hope you liked it. I thought it was kind of fun to use a program instead of just looking at static pictures. Now, of course, one can always go ahead and find lots of really nice pictures of these things. In fact, I think it's quite beautiful to see that. And one thing that's kind of fun is to see which of these have we had robots land on, because it always looks extra cool to see pictures taken on a surface. So that's a tour of our solar system. That was the planets. And next we're going to talk about the galaxy.